Hi, everybody. This is Rob Server. I'm Field CTO at Spirion, and with me is Danny Murphy. Danny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great, Rob. Thanks. My name's Danny. I am the Chief Product Officer over here at Lepide. Yeah, it's great to be here today.
Thanks. And we're here to talk about DSPM with both a joint Spirion and Lepide partnership. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it if we don't mind. And let's go ahead and talk about what is DSPM. I'll read this here just once. Data security posture management provides visibility as to where sensitive data is and who has access to that data, how it's been used, and what the security posture of that data store application is. Seems pretty straightforward, right, Danny?
Yeah, I can't argue with that. It's a fair statement.
Now, the interesting thing is it breaks down to discovery of identifying where that sensitive data is stored. It doesn't have any limits as to where it's stored because it can be anywhere. It can be on-prem. It could be in the cloud. It could be structured. It could be unstructured data. Your data exists in your organization, and it's going to exist in many different locations. So we also want to be able to classify and assess the risk in the organization. So you want to treat data consistently across your multiple cloud environments. So on-prem, hybrid, or cloud environments, it has to be treated the same. You have to be able to apply the same types of controls or at least reach an endpoint of action that is agreeable to the policies you have. So also, I believe, Danny, you want to talk a little bit about assessing that information?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as you said, Rob, the first step really is discovering where this data is, no matter where it resides. But I think most importantly, once you've kind of run that discovery and classified the data and understood where your most sensitive data is and where it's kind of residing, as I said, I think the next thing to understand is where your data is most at risk. So the highest risk areas, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at this over the next few kind of slides. But really kind of understanding where the data may be residing in open shares, maybe if the access to the data, if people are overprivileged, if they've got access to data that they're not using, and then not just the data itself, but also taking a look and understanding risk around the systems that are providing access to the data as well. I also think that this is something that's quite often overlooked when we take a data-centric approach to data security.
Thank you for that. And you're right, Danny. Data tells a story. It's able to give meaning, and it matters who's looking at it, when they're looking at it, where the system that houses that data is, and the timeliness of that data. So also the last part of that is monitoring protection of that data. So you talked a little bit about, I think you said, the protections. Go ahead and start with that if you don't mind, and I'll key in a little bit later on the data aspects.
Yeah, I mean, from a monitoring and protection perspective, we're really kind of, if we understand where the data is and who's got access to it and what levels of access they've got, then obviously we can't lock everything down. We have to follow this kind of least privilege model when we're dealing with sensitive data and we know where it is and, as I said, who's got access to it. But more importantly, what are they doing with it? So are they copying the data? Are they kind of overexposing it by sharing it? Are they kind of deleting data that's still required for basic business operations? So really understanding who's doing what with the data. So this will give us kind of complete coverage when we're talking about this from a visibility perspective. And then we need to put in the necessary controls to make sure that we are effectively protecting the data as much as we can. So this could range from a number of different kind of solutions and solutions that are some outside of the scope of the conversation today, but we're looking at making sure that we can remediate data that's not in the correct locations or encrypt the data if needed as well. But more importantly, when we're talking about monitoring, it's really around understanding if there's any kind of anomalous activity or being able to identify threats around the data as well is also really important.
Excellent. So thanks for that. So as a summary for this page is find out what data exists, assess risk through classification or reporting access methods, and then minimizing your data footprint where possible, and where data must exist, you have to protect it through access controls or apply some level of control over it, which is really what DSPM really is. Understanding how to control and apply cures to your data, not just data loss prevention.
That's right. Exactly.
Perfect. All right, so ask the right questions with your data. So you want to understand your data. That's the data discovery portion. What sensitive data do you have in your organization? How much of it do you have? Where is it located? Don't forget endpoints. That is usually the first point of contact for data with the end user that's going to be processing that data. The next point is going to be your frontline file stores and SharePoint locations. Do you still need that data? And then there's the controlled data access portion, Danny.
Yeah, exactly. So once we understand where it is, what we've got, how much we've got, and how and where it resides, who's got access to it? You know, should they even have access? If they've got access, how long have they had access? When did the access change? And then kind of coupling those two pieces together, if we know that people have got access, and we know that they possibly have legitimate access to this sensitive data. You know, many people do need access to sensitive data to perform their job roles. How is it being used? You know, we often say that trust, you know, should not be an advocated security strategy. Of course not, but it often is. So this is really making sure that we understand what users are doing with the data, if they've got legitimate access to this sensitive data, wherever it resides.
Got it. Thanks for that. So how can we service this problem together as a joint solution? Well, Spirion is the number one solution for data discovery and classification. As we'll see in the next couple of slides, we're able to find data with accuracy and able to remediate that automatically with our playbooks. So discovery, classification, providing understanding, and then applying controls around that data. Now, where Spirion has its gaps is places where Lepide comes in, which is the access controls and orchestration for that. So Danny, if you want to talk a little bit about those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of goes into these three key areas throughout our solution, our data security platform. But we've essentially got these modules within our platform: Lepide Trust, Lepide Detect, and Lepide Auditor. And it's really broken out into these three key areas. So protecting data, detecting threats, and of course, continuously auditing, reporting, monitoring to achieve compliance. So when we talk about protecting data, we're really talking about access governance. And once again, understanding who's got access to what, understanding if permissions are excessive, and then ensuring that only the right users are getting access to the data, once again, to perform their job functions, making sure that they're not overprivileged.
Excellent.
The second, thanks. The second piece is around detecting threats and responding to those threats as well. So as we're continuously monitoring and understanding how people are interacting with the data, ensuring that we can do this in real time, understanding user behavior is also really important. So if people perform actions that are outside of their usual behavior, for example, if they start accessing sensitive data that they don't usually access, if they send emails that contain sensitive data, if they are even logging on at unusual times outside of business hours, you know, we should be able to flag that type of behavior and ultimately respond to it in a fashion that would be appropriate for that type of threat. So being able to lock user accounts down or disable user accounts, being able to kind of quarantine the data, make the data unavailable in these particular situations, then we should be able to do that in real time. And then finally, as we keep saying, this isn't a one-step process. This whole thing that we're talking about here is continuous. So much with our auditing and reporting, continuously understanding how the data's being interacted with, but of course none of it's static. So those discovery scans should be continuous as well. And then this whole process should go around and around as a kind of a methodology, really.
That's correct. So thanks for that, Danny. Let's dive a little bit into a little bit of the Spirion aspect. And I'll start off with a comment. Finding data is easy. Finding sensitive data accurately is very hard. You're going to get false positives with a lot of different types of solutions. This is one of my favorite slides. It's an oldie but a goodie. The squared text in the TC dump with big surprise, it's a false positive, is actually something that matches a credit card number. However, this is a perfect example of a false positive. This was real, an actual occurrence. In that context, that cannot be a credit card number, and you should not find those types of matches. It's this type of noise. When you're looking over millions, tens of millions of files, you can get an enormous number of matches. You need to minimize the amount of false positives. Sorry about the timer there. To identify true matches, and we can do that across many. We are an accurate data discovery mechanism by minimizing false positives. The next slide, discover data at its source, playbook automation. So this is the next segment for why you want to work with Spirion. When you have accurate data results, you can automate the remediation process or the cure process. Playbooks have a logical flow. So do your business rules. We can map your business rules to those flows and make actionable and prioritized checkpoints to understand what has to happen at what point. We can delegate ownership of that, and we can automate as much or as little with that. So if you want to have a user step in and say, no, I need to review this before a permanent action such as a delete, then that's fine. If you want to apply an encryption cure, we can do that as well. And we'll talk a little bit about context-rich classification here. The classifications we can apply can be persistent. We're able to put in classifications to files persistently so other solutions can read them. They're automatic, they're visual, and they're persistent. They're also, if you can bring up the next one, purposeful, contextual, interoperable. So that means you're able to get that meaning for the user who's viewing it. Something like a credit card data can be both PCI or EPHI related at the same time. Who's viewing it will indicate who's caring about which classification. Social insurance numbers, MRNs, credit card numbers, banking, those all have different levels. They can all exist in the GDPR, CPRA, PCI, etc. We can have all of those sorts of things in each context for classification.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us nicely into assessing the risks. So we've kind of got our accurate data discovery and classification, and then we can bring that information. That was great, the stuff that you just went through, Rob, there, and just looking at how we handle those false positives actually, and the kind of the multitude of flexibility that you have inside the solution to kind of gain that accuracy is fantastic. So if we bring that context into the reports and apply that to assessing risk, this is a good example of what we can do when we bring the two solutions together from within the Lepide console. So you can see over in the bottom right hand corner, we've been able to identify using Spirion the content of each of these files. So we, as Rob mentioned on the previous slide, actually we've identified some social security numbers, some generic phone numbers. We've associated that with a specific compliance mandate or regulation. There's many templates in the Spirion solution. And we've taken that information and then we are essentially just reviewing the access rights across that data. So what you'll notice is that at the bottom we've got a list of people that can access that data, and you'll see there's a combination of green ticks now and red ticks. So what we've determined is that over a certain period of time, in this case, it is just the last 30 days, but we could go back, to get more accurate, we could go back like 180 days or even a year and review the access attempts and what people are actually doing inside these folders and around this sensitive data. Now, what the green ticks indicate is that the users are active, and what the red ticks indicate is that for that period of time, they haven't performed any actions. So this would be a kind of a typical example, but we can see that all of these people here have got full access to the data, but they quite clearly don't all need that full access. Even the last guy on the list there, Justin, you can see he's got a combination of both green ticks and red ticks. So even though he's got full access, he doesn't really need it. He might only be kind of opening the folders to view files, so he doesn't need the permission to kind of modify or delete, as an example. So we're using this information to make better decisions around the data, and then kind of start working towards that least privilege model to ensure only people that need access to the data actually have access. So one way that we can start to use the two solutions together to identify and assess risk. To the next one, Rob, please.
You got it.
Great. So this actually is going taking it kind of one step further, because we're still looking at the same folder. It's laid out in a slightly different way here, but this is really going to help us to understand how these permissions are being granted, where those permissions are coming from. Of course, you know, we typically see a mixture of permissions. They could be coming, they could be inherited from the parent object. They could be directly applied, which, you know, is not great because we've got broken inheritance. But more often than not, and best practice, of course, is to see these permissions being granted through security groups in Active Directory. But then we get into a situation where we really need to kind of drill into that information, because we can't just go stripping out security groups. It's going to upset a lot of people and probably start revoking access where we shouldn't be revoking access around people that actually need legitimate access to this data. So using Lepide Trust, in this case, we can actually go in and review those security groups and understand that if we take this security group away from this particular folder, it's actually going to revoke the permissions from these other users in this security group. So all in all, it gives us a lot more visibility to really kind of make better decisions when we are trying to kind of least privilege model around our data. Yeah, thanks, Rod. Next slide, please.
You got it.
Another way that we would obviously want to start with assessing risk, and this is probably right at the top really, is understanding where this data is overexposed at scale. So we're talking about open shares across the organization that are effectively open to anyone. This is a typical starting point when we start to assess risk after we've identified where our most sensitive data is, what it is. Then we want to understand where is it exposed en masse, really. So understanding where these open shares are can help us to quickly remove those kind of mass groups like everyone or domain users as an example, and start to strip those out to really kind of secure our sensitive data. Next one, please, Rob. And then we need to, then we should really be thinking about the systems that are governing access to our data as well, typically Active Directory. So we need to make sure that we're practicing good Active Directory hygiene. You know, when we are running these processes together with organizations that we work with today, we typically start with just identifying inactive users that, you know, just not handling these accounts. These are users that are still enabled in Active Directory, but they're no longer active. They're just not authenticating or accessing any resources. We couple that in with the reports that we looked at previously. We can start to really understand how we get that kind of permission sprawl, and how, if you know, as we know, these privileged accounts in Active Directory are what hackers target. If we've got these accounts just kind of spread out across Active Directory that are still enabled, they've still got access to sensitive data and other resources within an organization. It's just something that doesn't really need to be there. It's a risk that we can eliminate quite quickly. Within Lepide, we have a way to automate how we handle these inactive users. We can lock them down, archive them, even delete them after a certain period of time as well. So this is a quick win when reducing your risk within Active Directory. And then on to the next slide, please, Rob. And then while we're talking about that, users with admin privileges, this is always a very interesting report. So taking our kind of built-in administrative security groups, understanding, who's got effective admin privileges. Of course, you could just look inside domain admins, but a lot of the time we see nested security groups, and people are you're probably well experienced with this, Rob. People get removed from these security groups, but they've still got effective admin privileges because they're a member of a nested security group. So this is where we get that kind of permission sprawl inside Active Directory. And this is just within Active Directory, and we really still don't understand what access these groups have got. So when you tie this in together, it's a kind of a full Active Directory scan, applying that across your data, and then going right back to where we started with data discovery and classification through Spirion, tying it all together. And of course, this all ties back to and relates to good data security posture management.
That's right. And I'm just thinking about this, Danny, is the data propagation tied with inheritance and propagation of rights has been a problem for ever. I'm glad we're trying to solve it, but it looks like we're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it would be great to take a look at how our two solutions integrate together, and we actually do this. I think on the next, let's take a look, Rob. If you've got something to show, that'd be fantastic.
So I'm going to step it back to the beginning of what I talked about, which was we'll do the data discovery and classification piece. And bad, Rob, I didn't reset my display because the first thing I want to show is playbooks. So playbooks are what direct our discovery engine to find data. So let's go ahead and just start with a real quick one here, a very simple playbook. They can get much more complex, but it's unnecessary to do so if you have a basic need. You have data flows in the top. Just envision pouring a file in through the top of the agent, and then you have questions to ask. What types of data are in that file? File gets interrogated. Database field gets interrogated. The SharePoint location gets drawn down and inspected. Does it contain the data type you're looking for? No? Great. Don't want to do anything. You can have an entire no path read like with different decision points, but in this case, we want to leave the file alone. Then you have the yes path. Yes, it has that data. Well, let's apply a classification to that. Context rich. Again, you can have multiple decision points. I'll show you a more complex playbook in a moment here, but this one just wants to apply a single classification and then an MPIP label there. So we're engaging Microsoft Purview Information Protection to apply RMS protection. Great. Okay, so let's take a quick look at a little bit more detailed solution. Let's pick this one. I think this one will be a little bit more complex. As you can see, it's a lot bigger and it flows through. And I can zoom out and show you the pathing. But again, you're asking questions up top. What type of data do I have? Is it stale? Do I want to delete it? If it's stale, then I want to delete it. It doesn't need to be there. We don't have to worry about putting access rights around that. We don't need it. But if we do need it, then we have to ask the different questions. What needs to happen? Is it something that needs to be in that location? Do we need to invoke Lepide to have different controls placed around that? And we can do that through a playbook and then executing the ETL through our report mechanism. We have a custom report engine, and we have a report here called Lepide integration, which through an ETL will provide Lepide with the information it needs. So let me go ahead and sort this to show that the classifications occur. There we go. So in this case, we have a file share location. Lepide needs the information of that folder path, the ACL information, the file metadata, and all gets ingested into Lepide so it can do its things. I did skip one part of the solution, and I do want to step through and show the automation of the playbooks. In this case, it's a very simple discovery scan. I'm running the agent here locally, and we have data in a folder, but we also have the same data in a different folder to show context. Now we're applying discovery and classification rules and protections to that file. So what happened here? Well, I found a file, call log summary. This is a simple text file. It has credit card number in there. No context, but we know because it passes London Bank bin and all the tests. So what we did was we wrapped that up into a P file. This has Microsoft Purview information protection here. We've done discovery on a credit card, on a driver's license, and classified it because that's simply how I set it. We did the same thing with a passport, and we're able to get this information again through the ETL process out of the Spirion console and into Lepide, where it can then do its thing like we showed earlier. Now, I'm going to switch back, Danny, to the slide deck.
Yep.
I think this will do it. Nope, I need to go over here, and we'll talk about how Lepide can assist further with that information on monitoring protection.
Yeah, this is it. So everything that we looked at previously with the integration, all of that context really comes from Spirion. So, you know, you can certainly review who's got access to what levels of access they've got. You can certainly review, as we're looking at here, data that's being copied. But it really doesn't help you if you don't have that context. You know, it's all very well a bunch of files being copied, but what is the data? What has actually been copied? And as you can see here, we've got multiple instances of driving licenses. We've got passport numbers. I think that's it actually in this screenshot, but you get the idea. All of this is all of that context that you can see in the content type, the relative compliance, the associated risk level based upon the number of hits or instances we found in each file, really gives us that context to identify and understand if there are any kind of active threats around the data. So this file that we're looking at here is essentially a list of files that have been copied. But once again, the context, as you saw in the previous views, around the permissions analysis as well. So a ton of reports that around different kind of data stores that give us this information when we're pulling this from the Spirion engine. The next one, please, Rob.
Yep.
And as I mentioned previously, all of this is in real time. So we have threat models that can be enabled, one-click enablement from within the solution. And I've kind of just put a screenshot of the configuration pane on the screen here, but we need to be able to detect these things in real time. We need to understand if there's been like a mass data copy that contains a ton of sensitive data. We need to understand if an email is being sent out that has sensitive data, either in the body or as an attachment. We need to understand if there's, I don't know, a threat to data like a ransomware attack, for example. And we need to be able to react to that as well. So it's all very well getting the alert or receiving it into a live feed or even getting it on a mobile app. But being able to initiate a response to that is also incredibly important. So in the kind of, I kind of mentioned a ransomware attack, but essentially containing it. So disabling a network adapter, disabling a user account, even, you know, we could even initiate a script to shut the server down, just isolating that once we've identified that particular threat in real time. So we can look at typical characteristics. As I say, we've got a ton of these built into the solution, and we can just enable them. We can customize and build these ourselves as well. Just go to the next slide, Rob, please.
You got it.
And then in addition to this as well, and I mentioned this earlier, is learning user behavior. So understanding what users do in a typical sequence, in a typical day, the type of changes they make, the type of data that they interact with, where they interact with it, is really kind of fundamental in identifying anomalous activity that could be a threat. So if we understand what people do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, the longer we learn user behavior over time, the more accurate this type of information becomes. We can start to get a good picture of how our employees are interacting with our data. So when they do something that's out of the ordinary, with that context, we can flag this up. As you can see, there's a big kind of surge in activity on this graph that we're looking at here that is anomalous activity for that particular user, Marty. So we would send out an alert and then investigate that immediately. It could be that Marty's decided to access some different data for a particular job, or something that he's supposed to be doing for the organization. It could be legitimate, but ultimately having the means to identify when someone is doing something that they shouldn't necessarily be doing, once again, that kind of user and entity behavioral analytics, and then tying that to anomalous activity. And I did previously mention as well, Rob, but I think it's really important that we just reiterate that this is a continuous process. So we need to be reviewing these reports. We need to be adjusting these rules. We need to be running these scans, all the time.
You're stealing my thunder. This is my last slide, but it's absolutely correct. This is a cycle. This is a life cycle of data. Data is created and becomes stale every day. Users are created and deleted. Employees are hired and terminated every day. Scan your data, review your Active Directory, make sure that you're showing proper hygiene for both the data set and your stores for users. And apply those protections and the cures as is appropriate for your business. So I think that's all we've got. Danny, do you have any closing words for us?
No, I don't. I mean, if anything that I do actually. I don't know why I said that. If anything that anyone has kind of looked at today has been of interest, and it's an active project that you've got right now, please do kind of visit our websites or kind of contact us so we can help you to discover more around your data security posture management projects.
Absolutely. And I should have put our emails on there. Danny.murphy@lepide.com, rob.server@spirion.com. So feel free to reach out to us. Danny, thank you so much for joining us today. And
always a pleasure, Rob. Always a pleasure.
We're going to be doing this again real soon, I believe.
Yep, we've got the next one scheduled. So look forward to, hopefully speaking to some of you, or, you guys listening to this again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.